William Trowbridge was born in Chicago and he grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. He earned a BA and an MA in English from the University of Missouri Columbia and a PhD from Vanderbilt University. He's the author of 8 full-length poetry collections, and to read the titles is sort of mysterious and entertaining in itself. Enter Dark Stranger in 1989. Oh Paradise, Flickers, The Complete Book of Kong, Ship of Fool, Put This On, Please, new and selected poems. Old Guy Superhero, the complete collection that came out in 2019. His ninth collection of poems, Call Me Fool, is forthcoming from Red Hen Press in 2022. From 1986 to 2004, he was editor of the Laurel Review and Green Tower Press. He received an Academy of American Poets Prize and a Pushcart Prize, and he has held fellowships at Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the McDowell Colony, Ragdale, Yaddo, and the Anderson Center. In 2012, Bill was appointed Poet Laureate of Missouri. He is a distinguished professor emeritus at Northwest Missouri State University, and he currently teaches in the low residency MFA program at the University of Nebraska. He lives in Lee's Summit, Missouri, with his wife. His interests are reading, travel, motorcycling, wine tasting, fine dining, and trying to keep the damn rabbits out of the hibiscus. I first met Bill in the 1980s before his first published full-length collection of poetry. Even as a younger man, he was very good at reminiscing, and like good wine, his recollections and their realization in poetry have improved with age. I think the last word about Bill's poetry is from Billy Collins, who says, plunging headfirst into the colorful waters of popular culture, William Trowbridge manages to find there are ways to reiterate some of the basic stuff of lyric poetry. His gathered poems combine pointed social criticism with just plain verbal fun. Let's hear it from Bill Trowbridge.
Well, thank you, Ed, and thank you, David and Ed, for inviting me, and thank you for the Crazy Wisdom Poetry Circle. It's great to be here. I thought I'd get started with an old poem. I'm going to read some very new poems too, but this one's kind of old, but it's a rant poem, and it's a kind of a good one to start out with to get the juices flowing, I guess. And this poem seemed to fit the occasion pretty well. The occasion was in 1972, a guy named Mark Spitz won 7 gold medals at the Olympics, and that was a world record at that point. I don't think it is anymore, but it was. And ABC Wide World of Sports was interviewing people after the event to ask them what they thought of Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals, and it turned out that they thought that was good. Some hot news there from ABC World of Sports, except for one guy who said this: big deal. If I could swim as good as him, I'd win a lot of gold medals too. So there you are. It's just how you look at it. So this poem is called Self-Help. Let's get mad, fellow losers, fellow flops, fellow dust eaters, fellow weepers, fellow had a wife and couldn't keep hers. Let's get mad and bad and high in the stirrups. They never liked us, never gave us diddly when we needed a break. Who the hell are they anyway? 1,000 softies tops, moping over their pity floors, worried that the help these days is getting just too uppity to lick a boot, or that the snowpack at Aspen might be, well, simply intolerable. We're billions strong, tough as dandelions, raised on humble pie and hind tit, and we've had a belly full up to our eyeballs. Don't forget, without us, winning's obsolete. So let's knock off the oohs and ahs, the encores, the Wall Street Journal. Let them play the Super Bowl to an empty Superdome. Let the election returns read 0-0. Let them fight the next war by their lonesome with caviar and empty Mouton Rothschild bottles. Boycott their movies, their mouthwashes, their douchebags, their life insurance, their grinning 8x10 glossies. We'll show 'em what losing's like. Put the boots to 'em, head 'em off at the pass, trap 'em in a box canyon, take their children hostage and teach the little snots our primitive ways to say, oh, well, and what's the use when they take the wrong turn off, bobble the punt, borrow from the guy with the two big friends named principal and interest, leave them with nothing to fall back on but a rock and a hard place, the devil in the deep blue sea, chaos and old night, aces and eights, household finance and the Reader's Digest sweepstakes. And let their letters begin with, dear applicant, thank you for letting us see your resume. Or, dear customer, a good credit rating is a serious responsibility, not a right. We've got the bench, we've got general admission, we've got bad stomachs, bad arches, bad checks, bad timing, bad luck, bad news, and the worst, the very worst intentions. Remember Wrong Way Corrigan, General Burgoyne, Harold Stassen, Pickett's Charge, the Electric Spaghetti Fork, Troy Donahue, Troy, the Edsel, Leisure Suits, Dynaflow, the Maginot Line, and Casey at the Bat. Not to mention Uncle Saul and his worm farm. Let's reach down for that minus 10%, that faulty premise, those visions and revisions, that bush league, cockeyed, backfiring, two left-footed shit for Bray's urge to go out there and do something. Sort of. Into rent. When I was a kid, 4th of July was a big deal, and the ultimate explosive was the cherry bomb at that time. You know, those black cats were kind of like, you know, for amateurs, and you could do all sorts of things with cherry bombs, and so I can't help but writing a poem about them, I guess. They would explode underwater. That was one of the beauties of the cherry bomb, and you could create many special effects with that. Cherry bombs. The red seeds of anarchy and blitz, so quick, so blunt, so right to boys who dreamed of fuse and detonation. They came 1/5 stick of dynamite, veiled in oriental understatement, light fuse and step back. Just a step, and our ears howled for half an hour, our faces puckered numb. We learned to toss them quick, on Susie's lawn, under love cars by the lake, waded into swimming pools where beauties bobbed up flushed and muscle boys felt testicles retract like snails' horns. You little pricks want to step out to the parking lot, they snarled. Blam, we answered. Blam, blam, blam. Any of you ever played Little League Baseball? Maybe if you had my fate too. You know, some people were not very good at it, and I was not very good at it. And the place that you put a kid, you know, and you have to play everybody at, you know, one time or another. So you want to put him where he does the least harm, and that is right field. Most batters hit the ball to center or left, and so it's a good bet. Actually, Peter, Paul, and Mary had a song about playing right field, so it's, you know, it is kind of archetypical. I mentioned an English poet at the end of this poem, and I wanted to kind of prepare you for that. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the English Romantic poet, and this is called Poet's Corner, which is, you know, not only in Westminster Abbey but on the ball field. Poet's Corner. They put me in right field because I didn't pitch that well, or throw, or catch, or hit, because I tried to steer the ball like a paper plane, watch Christmas gifts with big red ribbons floating through the strike zone, and swung at dirt balls. So they played the odds, sent me out there in the tall grass by the Skoll sign, where I wandered distant as the nosebleed seats my father got us in Comiskey Park. My teammates looking remote and miniature, their small cries and gesticulations like things remembered in a dream. I went dreamy, sun on my face, the scent of sod and bluegrass, the lilt of bird call and early cricket, bending afternoon away from fastballs and hook slides to June's lazy looping single. Baseball at its best. My only fear, the deep fly with my name on it. Meteoric as Jehovah, or Coach Bob Zambezi, closing in to deliver once again the meaning of the game, what it takes to play, how I had to crouch vigilant as a soldier in combat, which he never had the privilege of being, and stop that lolling around with my head up my ass, watching the birdies and picking dandelions like some kind of little priss, some kind of Percy Bitch Shelby. Our coach was the English teacher too, so there you are. 50 sports. I keep going back to my childhood. I'll get out of that in a while. But I played football in the 50s, and I had a bad coach. I had some good coaches too, but I had a bad coach, and this poem is kind of about the bad coach. The thing about, and some of you will remember, I noticed, we're not all spring chickens here. Some of you remember that sports medicine in the 1950s was quite primitive, and one of the tenets of sports medicine in the 50s was that you should drink no water during practice. So we were out there in Nebraska, 100-degree weather, 2.5 hours in the day in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon, 100 degrees, not allowed to drink water, but you were allowed to take salt tablets, which the coach said helped you retain what water you had, which was like, a drop after a while. Anyway, this is called Coach Said in the coach's own words. Coach said, no water during practice. You don't want to end up like the guys in those movies, lost for days in the desert, and then they find the oasis and guzzle away, and nobody there to stop them. They think their luck's finally changed, that the world's just turned into mama's tit, but they get waterlogged and die. I saw a man die in the war. Bang, like that. The start of training, run over by the bus that brought us. And I don't want to see it again. No, sir. It can spoil a good marriage, seeing that. So don't let me find anybody sneaking water. Use the salt tablets. And no dissipation during the night before a game, shooting your wad for you comedians in the back. It drains vital fluids, same as crying. You're left with an unfocused mind and a case of cottonmouth. Jump in a cold whirlpool if you're so hot and bothered. Don't expect to be some Romeo stud who thinks his little cheerleader won't spit on him when he's down. I could tell you some things, but just remember this. It ain't going to be like last year. No goddamn water. Thanks, Coach. Maybe some of you had this experience too. When you were a kid, a stray dog following you home, and it followed me home, and I didn't have a dog, I didn't have a pet, and I thought, dogs likes me, and I like the dog, and I go, get it in the house and feed it, and maybe I'll have a doggy then. This poem is about that. It's called Obedience. The ghost of it whimpered back last night from a wet November 50 years ago. The straggly cocker that shadowed me home from school and, when I let it in, ignored a meal to snuffle crotches and hump legs, as if to win us with what it knew of love. Its sad pink dick unsheathed like a gut protruding from a wound, its roomy eyes spinning with dread, its odor of mushroom and shit making itself at home in our carpet. No, bad dog, down, we said, shoving it away, till my father got it in the car, and we drove off through the dark to a cornfield outside town, where the rain blew, and it slumped off right away, going to get lost, like a good dog. It still haunts me. Anybody ever rode the tilt-a-whirl at the amusement park? The most demonic device that mankind has created, I think, because it rotates or it twirls you three different ways. It goes, the big thing goes around, then you're in a little cubicle that spins also, and then it also goes up and down. And every year at Playland Park in Council Bluffs, Iowa, I would try to get through the tilt-a-whirl successfully, and I failed every time. So anyway, I read not too long ago that the movement in the tilt-a-whirl is comparable to what's now called chaos theory, which I thought was an interesting tie-in. So this poem is called Tilt-a-Whirl. It speeds you in a circle on a wavy platform and at the same time whips you around inside that circle, wheel within a wheel, to quote Ezekiel. Each year I tried to master its gyrations, only to regurgitate with my corn dog and cherry coke, my youthful self-assurance. This dated wry contraption I now read can be a model for chaos theory. The spins of that inner circle, erratic as the bully summoned by some butterfly wing to beat me up 3 days in a row on my way home from school. Guess, he smirked when I asked why. I thought he was a nice man, said Killer Perry Smith, right up to the minute I cut his throat. In Italy, a guy was killed by a pig falling from a balcony 2 stories up. Neighbors dined on free ham afterwards. Some zealot plugs an Austrian archduke, and the world heaves up 8 million corpses. Hang on tight, the attendant shouts, as we brace for gravity's blindside. This next poem is about committee meetings, which I learned to hate very soon. I was an English professor in another life, and we had department meetings, which were the most hellish kinds of thing. They were supposed to last, you've had them, some of you have been in those, or any kind of committee was supposed to last half an hour. Then an hour and a half is still going. People are talking about stuff that has nothing to do with what they're supposed. Anyway, don't get me going. So this is called another rant poem, I think. Committee meeting. A beating with nettle-coated noodles, mind entreating fight or stealthy fleeing, the depleting kit and dull caboodle. I doodle cartoon faces and bouquets of loopy squiggles as time drags along, excreting mustard gas. Is this the will's unseating as seeming centuries creep by like slugs retreating over salt? Is there no halt to this browbeating or hot air keeps competing with itself in front row seating, de-meeting issues down to bare bone blather, meeting out ennui as pores keep leaking in this overheating of the stomach's juices that makes us strain to keep our bowels from blowing bubbles? Oh, toil and trouble, while buffs redouble notions they won't ever even start completing, and pain comes full back cleating up our spines in this Lilliputian strudel, repeating and repeating, eating up the years till flying sheep send down their bleedings and chickadees go moo instead of tweeting. So there, committees. Next poem is about one of my favorite movie stars. I'm a film classics nut, and Fred Astaire is, of course, one of the big stars of that. Very interesting guy. He was a great dancer. He and Gene Kelly. And I've read that he felt kind of awkward because he had large hands, and he felt that they looked kind of not graceful like a dancer should. And he used to kind of keep his hands kind of by side or close them so you couldn't see how big his hands were. And the film I'm referring to is I think it's I can't remember the title of the film, but he's dancing with a clothes tree. Have you seen that? It's a famous scene. It's the clothes tree, an inert object. He's dancing with it. So this is called Why a Stare. Why a stare? because he can take what twists our ankles, scrapes our knees, cuts our fingers, what strains, bloodies, chips, barks, and fractures all the world's impedimenta, and teach it how to dance with him, of all people, those outsized hands and feet, the whole frame like ours, unlikely, not cut out for looking debonair. Yet chairs rumbled, brooms samba'd, canes were coaxed into the karaoke. His adagio with clothes tree, for example, where he sweeps inertia off its legs, breezing through the rudiments of glide and leap and pirouette, till dead wood waits on edge for his return, to catch it in mid-swoon and, finally, waltz it around to its customary spot. When the lights go up, we sigh into ourselves, rise for our occasions, thinking, these hands, these feet. So I wrote I like to use pop culture a lot, as you might guess. And for some reason, I decided to write a poem about King Kong. And it kind of morphed itself into a whole collection finally. So I thought I'd read a couple of those poems. This one is called Kong Turns Critic. The man said, he's a brilliant special effect, given the film technology of the 30s, but the story is hopelessly contrived, even allowing for the strong mythic element. The woman said, no, he looks too much like a stuffed toy, a huge piece of period kitsch, ludicrous when he tries for tragedy. The man shook his hair and made smoke, insisting, verisimilitude is irrelevant, as in any Gothic melodrama. I marveled at these mammoth words, wondering how they were folded into such little brains. I ate the man first, then the woman, both stringy, but what's not these days? Kong incognito. The secret is to blend in. Choose neutral colors and patterns that break up the silhouette. And, in my case, slouch a little. Avoid vertical stripes and wear dark glasses. Even when everything else is right, the eyes can betray. And the voice, keep it deep in the throat, like this, ee. Being careful to always say average things. For instance, when greeted, say, I am fine. What are you? Or, yes, the weather today is free of cats and dogs. My temperature is typical. When driving in heavy traffic, say, up yours, motherfucker. This is what average people say to one another when a foreigner's not around and they don't have to shoot him before asking any questions. Another movie poem. This one is about Chuck Berry. And I kind of preface this with a reference to a wonderful Saturday night live skit about the Voyager spacecraft that was launched in 1977. And you may recall that a lot of America, tokens of American culture were included, and one of those was a recording of Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. And so the skit in Saturday Night Live was the 4 words that came to us from outer space, the 4 words that came to us from outer space, and they were, send more Chuck Berry, which I thought was great. But you know, Chuck was not treated with a great deal of respect early in his career, even when he was, had invented rock and roll. And this poem involves a movie called Go Johnny Go. It was done in 1959, and Chuck Berry played a bit part in this. The star was a rock and roll guy named Jimmy Clanton, who you probably have forgotten about if you ever heard of him. He had a career about a year and a half. He was the big star, and Chuck was the bit player. Problem being, 1959, Chuck was black and Jimmy Clanton was white. So that's what this poem's about. It's called Proof of Intelligent Life. You can go, Johnny, go. 1959. Burgeoning teen idol Johnny Melody is played by burgeoning teen idol Jimmy Clanton. Fame now dead, though his molded DuckTales got another 80 years. Chuck Berry, who's just invented rock and roll and whose song provides the movie's theme, plays Jimmy's fan, consigned to spend most scenes nodding and pointing from the wings during Jimmy's Cloroxed ditties. Like Richie Valens singing his theft of Little Richard's Oh My Soul called Oh My Head. Chuck's allowed his blink of spotlight before it's back to pimping from the white boy. Seeming relaxed at the back of the 50s bus, could he know that in our distant century, the world will still be dancing to his chops? And even if we all blow up, Johnny B. Good will head the galaxy's top 10. This is a poem about shadows. I'm always kind of interested in shadows and what they, how they look. And so this poem's called You Are Your Shadow. Shadow loves the little children, the way they lie propped on their silky pillows, quiet as daguerreotypes. Shadow loves the grown-ups too. How, when he drops them in the dark water, they relax al dente. Call him workaholic, though sometimes he'll pop open a can of sorrow to kick back and pull out a program from his morgue of old TV shows. Shadow's favorite TV star is Mr. Jimmy the Schnoz Durante, whose nose casts a big banana shadow when he flashes his profile and says, ha-cha-cha. Durante knocks him dead with his string-back finale, Me and My Shadow. The Schnoz rising behind him, the Schnoz no more. Then there's Gomer Pyle, USMC. Shadow weeps sometimes, knowing the dead Marines can always use a few good shadows. Semper Mortuus. Shadow was born blind, which is why you have to catch your breath when he holds tight. To find you, he depends on Umbra, his seeing eye. Even so, Shadow loves a good joke, like why the Shadow crossed the road, to keep tabs on all his little friars. Ha-cha-cha. Well, I keep writing a poem, and then it morphs into a bunch of other poems. And here's another example of it. I was thinking one day about superheroes, and that they're all so damn young. Why don't we have an old superhero? So I thought, okay, I will conjure one up, and he's called Old Guy rather than Superman. It's Old Guy, and I'll read you a couple of these. There's a whole collection actually out about Old Guy. This is the first one. Old Guy, superhero. Feels like a young guy in a bad costume. The arms and legs sag and the waist too tight. Where there should be a large S, golden star, or lightning bolt, there's what looks like a zero, and on his trunks depends. The boots look more like flannel slippers. Some louts made off with his super hearing and x-ray vision, leaving only an ampli-ear, Coke bottle lenses. Like certain sheep, he doesn't fly so much as plummet. He hasn't smashed through a good wall or door since before he can remember, which is a little after breakfast. speeding bullets and tall buildings must now be turtles and molehills. He has no fear of an erection lasting more than 4 hours, but he's depressed and often flatulent. His best tactic, the long wait, accounts for the demise of many a foe. That, or rambling on and on and on and on, which can paralyze from as far as 10 feet. He's not handsome like Clark Kent or rich like Bruce Wayne, but in the prolonged run, he can be a deadly opponent if he doesn't mix you up with someone else. Old guy, superhero, counter-terrorist. Old guy's in line for his social security check when a man enters carrying a gun and wearing a suicide vest. Though people start to scream, old guy continues dog paddling through the shallows of his memory till the terrorist, noticing his scarlet cape and blank expression, shoves the gun at his head and asks how it feels to face certain death. Same as usual, says old guy, mistaking the threat for a show of interest, which prompts him to dust off his 5 examples of why everything's gone to goddamn hell since Truman fired Custer. After a while, the terrorist's eyelids droop, and he slumps into a nearby chair, snoring. When the gun drops to the floor, old guy politely retrieves it just as the SWAT team bursts in. How did you do it, old guy? Asked the press. Glue what? He says. Why don't we pause for a while? Ed mentioned sometimes we pause for a while for questions, and so I'll take a little break before I finish up. Are we ready for that?
If anybody has a question, you please type it in the chat and I will read it out. It's a little more organized than everybody talking at once.
Oh,
Not yet, apparently.
okay.
Don't see any messages yet, so
All right.
let us continue with the reading.
I will continue. Well, here's another example of one poem that morphed itself into a whole collection. This involves a character named Fool, who is the subject of a collection that I did several years ago called Ship of Fool, and is now also the subject of a new collection that's coming out in 2022 called Call Me Fool. So I'll read you a couple of those. The Fool, I might mention, is an archetype. As you know, the Fool is a character that has been around since the first tales were told and appears all over the place in poetry and fiction, in the Bible, and stand-up comedy, and in movies. We can't get rid of the Fool, I think, because pretty obviously we are blood relatives of the Fool. If you don't think you're related to the Fool, then that proves you're related to the Fool, it seems to me, but there you are. So this is called Basic Fool. Get down and give me 20, snaps Cupid. Fool pumps away, boots burnished, seams crisp, making choo-choo sounds. Show me your love face, snarls the cherub after Fool wobbles to attention. Love face, maggot, Cupid shrieks as Fool mugs like a chimpanzee having a stroke. Fool starts to think he should have tried something easier, like fire eating or celibacy. After a night of introspection, he hijacks a tank and drives it over Cupid, leaving a trail of feathers and baby fat. Later, he takes a high-speed joyride in somebody's Porsche with a waitress he's picked up. You may not believe this, Fool tells her right before the blowout, but I'm a flyboy from the infantry of love. You've all probably heard about the story about the monkey You get a million monkeys at a typewriter, and one of them's gonna type a Shakespeare play. Um, I'm using that in this poem, which is called "The Fool Invents the Piano," 1250 A.D. Like the monkey that accidentally typed Hamlet, Fool, tinkering in his workshop, constructed an exact likeness of a Steinway concert grand, which he called the making sounds with little hammers on wheels wires machine. It looked impressive, but he was puzzled about what to do with it. It was too big and complicated to be a doorstop, and too heavy and lopsided to be a wheelbarrow, especially with those little brass wheels. So he tried using it to scare rats out of the hayloft, but the rats weren't impressed, and he sprained his back winching it up. Fool pushed on the levers to make high sounds and low ones, wondering why he'd made some levers black. Neighbors, hearing eerie noises from his house, suspected Fool of conjuring evil spirits to cast spells on them. Several broke out in goat-shaped rashes. Others began speaking gibberish, which was then, soon Fool found himself trussed atop his machine, which was then dumped into a lake as Bartok's Piano Concerto No. 1 dawned on him. This Fool poem is called The Juggler. Fool starts with 3 red balls, tossing them up like fountain water, first two-handed, then one. It feels good, natural, but too easy, so he tries behind the back, between the knees, over the shoulder. Child's play. He's got a knack, he thinks, a calling. But he needs to stretch. He tries 2 chairs and a table, then a pole lamp and 2 radios, then 4 cleavers and a hatchet. Finally, he does the one he saw on Believe It or Not, 3 chainsaws on full raz. A cinch. So he adds another, plus an ocelot and 2 bicycles. He's on a roll now. Up go a Shetland, a Clydesdale, a widow and her banker. Not enough. So, the New York Philharmonic, Hoover Dam, Neptune, Jupiter. It's cosmic now, celestial, which brings in God, who's not too pleased at such levity encroaching on his grandeur. Zap, Fool finds himself empty-handed, waking from a dream his analysts will say symbolizes masturbation. Though Fool still feels the heavenly wheeling, the lift and catch, the wind swept to and fro, dam after planet, she after he, gravity become Fool's blithe assistant in a skirt so short you can see the pago. I'm working on a chapbook about my father, a series of poems about him. He was an interesting guy and suffered from PTSD at a time. He was in World War II and suffered from PTSD at a time where it was not really recognized as a real problem. It was sometimes jokingly referred to as nervous in the service. They call it combat fatigue, but they really didn't know what to do about it. But PTSD is a serious ailment we all know now. Anyway, this first poem in the chapbook is called "Welcome Home," which is if you've seen films of the soldiers coming home from World War II, they're on ships usually, and they come into a harbor in New York Harbor or in San Francisco, and usually on the roof of a big warehouse is a sign that says "Welcome Home" or "Well Done" in huge letters. So this poem is called "Welcome Home." All I have is a black and white photo taken in our yard. My father holding me, him still in his khakis, me dwarfed beneath his service cap, both of us looking as if the other might bite. Warrior and war baby joined by biology and chance. Him smiling stiffly for mother's camera. He brought souvenirs, his bayonet, a Nazi pistol, and a taste for Lucky's, bourbon, and rage. When he hugged, his cheek scraped like sandpaper. How I thought a hero's face should feel. His slaps could blur my eyes. They say 3 months in combat fractures a normal mind. He'd spent almost a year, the details of which would stay off limits. We must have looked like aliens, my mother, sister, and I, so plump and washed and green. Our neighborhood, hospitable as Mars. Welcome home, one of the Martians must have said. My father was a person who was very good at some things, but terrible with tools. And every time he attempted to use a tool or even look at it, sometimes something bad would happen. And so this poem is about that, called Mr. Fix-It. Cursed by the Brogan gods who govern tools, my father turned Laocoon with power cords. Laocoon, I should give you a footnote there. Laocoon was a character from Greek myth who was cursed by the gods and who was rained down snakes on him. He was tangled up with snakes, and there's a famous Greek statue of Laocoon wrapped with snakes around him. So I'll start again. Cursed by the Brogan gods who govern tools, my father turned Laocoon with power cords and garden hoses. Blind Pew with drills and hammers. Screws talked back. Nails went rubbery. Saws turned piranha. He'd sweat, fumble, curse his way through the gauntlet of directions, jamming a half-inch bolt in the hole for a quarter-inch dowel, joining tab A to extension N, skipping the ambiguous step 5A. God damn it, he'd declare to the unresponsive skies. Lousy son of a bitch, he'd say for our electric mower, whose cord he'd sever every other turn. A combat vet with 2 bronze stars, he soldiered on till the day he bought the canister of Grow Bright, advertised to turn your lawn lush as the greens at Pebble Beach. An IED in his uncertain grip. It worked by pumping air to force the liquid out the nozzle. He took the contents in the face, the metal lid grazing an ear. There was no talk at dinner, only the AC chuckling under the window. Last one I'm going to read about my father is titled Old Photo of My Father. It's sometime in the late 20s on Mission Bay, San Diego. The morning sun glistening off the water. He's water skiing on a disc, something that might have been the fashion. He's tanned, trim, and looking more content than I ever saw him. It's before the teenage lifelong marriage, before the war and his return, scorched for life, finding his colleagues in the meatpacking business had been promoted past him. It's before my sister, before me. It's in an album somewhere, maybe in a box thrown out by mistake. It must be 60 years since I've seen it. I see it now. My father, happy. Okay, we're getting near the finish here, so I'll read a couple of more Fool poems. These are from the new Fool book. That might be interesting to look at Fool. You know, Fool lives at all times, in all ages. So I thought I'd plunk him down in prehistoric times and look at caveman Fool and see what happens. So this is called Pleistocene Fool. When Fool's friends noticed some chips and scratches he'd made on the cave wall with stray spear chucks, it dawned on them that they'd never seen anything quite so graceful looking, so evocative. He was honored with a new word, eep, meaning artist. Members from other caves came to admire his masterpiece. Some saw a deer in it, some a mammoth, some a buxom woman. Wherever they moved, the eyes seemed to follow them, a feature they agreed distinguished Eep from Aper, and why they clubbed to death some local wannabes. Fool, now revered clan-wide and getting paid large sums of hindquarters and axe heads for even talking about his work, grew aloof and oversensitive, demanding larger fees and greater adulation. Though a few insisted that all they saw were random chips and scratches any fool could make, Fool's demands grew more excessive. The elders might have killed him, but for all of the magic powers he claimed his art endowed him with, immortality for one. Given that, they asked him to quell the latest menace, a raging cave bear with his mighty art they called Deep. He was to deep the bear, a word which it could also mean meet, nudge, hello, nostril, and a little later, dead Eep. I'm going to wind up with a poem about a ladder. Not a subject of poetry usually, but I like to take weird subjects in. You probably noticed if you've ever shopped for a ladder or looked at ladders in the store, they're covered with warning signs all over them, telling you that what you shouldn't do with the ladder. And if you read what they're warning people not to do, you're wondering who needs these signs, who needs to be told not to do this with a ladder, and wouldn't common sense tell you not to do that with a ladder? Well, obviously it doesn't, because those things are all over the ladder because of litigation. Somebody's actually tried to do these things with the ladder. So this poem is titled Caution. Before using ladder, be sure both ends are secured against something solid. To climb down ladder, reverse procedure for climbing up. If disorientation occurs, stop and wait till help arrives. To reduce waiting time for help, call out, help, help, I'm on this ladder. Do not use ladder to provoke oncoming motorists or attempt to board their vehicles. Avoid direct contact with eyes. If experiencing low self-esteem or other anxiety near ladder, say, "Get back, you ladder," 3 times. If ladder is found in rectum, contact physician immediately. Thank you. The end.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.
We had a number of late joiners come to visit with us. And so we need to let them know that if you have a question for Bill, please type it in the chat. I'm going to start with the comment from Lainey, because this might be like asking your favorite child, but out of all your books, which is your favorite?
I think it goes for my favorite book and my favorite poem. It's the one I last did. Just kind of a mind frame I had, you know, the poems that I've written kind of go to the background, and the ones I'm most interested and excited about are the ones I've just done or I'm working on. So my favorite book now is, I suppose my new and selected is up there too, but my favorite book now is the one that's coming out in 2022.
Lots of comments from people appreciating your humor. I had Dan ask if you, and maybe you've already done this, he's asked, can you read a current poem so we can compare with your older works? I think you read something pretty current.
Yes, I did. The last school poems are in the new book, so
Okay.
those are very.
So those are current. Okay, we'll move on then.
Some of
Let's see.
the father one too is pretty current. There are a bunch of them that are current. I started with old ones and kind of worked up.
What are you current working on? You mentioned a chapbook.
Yeah, chapbook about my father. We had a very complicated relationship, due partly to his PTSD and partly to my being a snotty teenager, and so it seems to me that a lot of father-son relationships have a lot of tension and are very revelatory about family life, and so I thought I would dig into that with this chapbook.
Okay, that answers Chad Christensen's question. And we have a comment from Ron Kirchie. Welcome, Ron. I'm really glad to see you here.
Ron, hi, Ron. Thanks for coming.
He says, nice work, pal. Bianca and I tuned in. Glad you did, Ron. And we expect you to read something at the open mic, so you better get ready.
Yeah, you better.
Lots of thank yous. Ooh, someone calling you a rock star.
Holy cow.
And Larry had a comment of what are your stylistic influences?
I suppose I'm influenced by my favorite poets. I actually my education as a poet was sort of self-tutored. The only creative writing class I ever had was a fiction writing class when I was a sophomore in college. But I got bitten by the poetry bug when I was studying for my PhD comps, and I was kind of thin on poetry, and that was going to be part of the comprehensive exam. So I was studying hard on those, and I ran across a poem by Howard Nemeroff in an old Brennan and Reed modern poetry anthology, and I thought I was overwhelmed by it, and I thought, gee, maybe I'll try to do one of those, and so I did one, and it felt good. I kept doing them, and eventually I wound up. My PhD was in Faulkner's novels and fiction, and so I retooled myself after I got a teaching job. Finally convinced them I ought to be doing poetry rather than teaching fiction. So I kept teaching fiction too, but I got published enough so they took me more seriously as a poet than a teacher of modern fiction. So did that end? I maybe lost track of your question.
I think you've sort of got there.
I started to ramble on, and
Laney has another question. I don't know how serious this one is, or if you want to answer it, because you may have to really go out on a limb.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on The Royal Wedding? It's my favorite Fred Astaire movie.
Isn't that where that famous scene is, where he's dancing with the clothes tree? Or is that the one where he's dancing on the ceiling?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's the one with the clothes tree.
Yeah, well, I was, that's written on my mind, and I wrote the poem, and I'm a Fred Astaire fan, but that's one of the great scenes that Astaire does, and if anybody else would try that, it would look clumsy and dumb, and he managed to convince you. You almost think that the clothes tree is responding to him rather than him manipulating it. Because he was so skillful at that, and he was. The other thing I liked about him is that he did not want to be, when he was dancing, he didn't want to be photographed close up. He wanted his whole body shown all the time, so that they couldn't use any kind of trickery. They were looking at the real thing. And so yeah, I'm a big fan of all his movies, I think.
Well, if Fool, Old Guy, and Kong were cast in an apocalyptic tag team SmackDown Championship poem, how would the characters pair up? And who would the fourth character be? I ask this because I think these characters are all you in some way. That is from Richard Robbins.
Oh my! If they were in a SmackDown, who would they fight, or who would win? Not sure.
I don't know if Richard, if you want to unmute and clarify your question.
Who would be on Kong's team? And who would be on Fool's team? And who would be on Old Guy's team? And who would the fourth wrestler be?
The fourth wrestler might be Gorgeous George, if you'll remember him.
Good answer.
One of my favorite guys, and I don't know whether they're none of those guys that you mentioned, none of the Kong and Fool and Old Guy are all, they're not really team players. They always kind of are on their own. So they probably would be fighting, Old Guy's a superhero, so he can take on anybody, sort of, talk them to death if nothing else. But yeah, Gorgeous George is in there nicely, I think.
Crumb would like to know if you have top 2 poetry journal recommendations that you can make.
Journal recommendations?
Yeah, your top 2, she asks.
You mean my journals or what? I'm not sure.
You
mean
have top 2 or 3 journals
okay. Yeah,
you subscribe to
okay.
and
I'll
can recommend.
mention 2 that I think are really good, and one is the Gettysburg Review, which I admire greatly, and also like New Letters, or I liked it especially when Bob Stewart was editor. He's recently retired from it, but it was a great literary magazine, I think. And what else? Prairie Schooner is a good one, and Rattle, I think, is one of my favorites now. It's a pretty new magazine out in California, but it's really, really good. And then there's an online one, and I'm from the old school, so I shied away from online journals for a long time. But there's one called Plume that prints a whole huge number of major poets and not so major ones like myself, and so I'm into that too.
This probably should be the last question. I want to get to some other readers.
Yeah.
Chad Christensen wanted to know what is appealing about having a main character throughout a series of poems.
How does it feel?
What is appealing about it?
What is appealing about it? It's appealing because maybe it's just me, but I write the first poem, and then that suggests the second poem, and then that suggests the third poem, and I just keep following that. When you get something going, you want to keep it going until it fizzles out. And so in those 3 cases, one thing led to another and led to another and led to another. And I just kept going till I thought I'd said all I wanted to say about that particular character. But I never do it on purpose. It just sort of happens.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for listening to me, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.